And faith is one of those languages. My goodness, if it's not a stumbling block for so many people. Do you ever think about just how you talk about faith, or?
Well, I think about it. I mean, particularly this evening, because
terrified at the fact
I've not spoken about my faith in front of a room of 150 people, and so I'm sitting here feeling very humble with regard to the leaders in the room and what they've achieved and their ability to talk about these topics, and I think at work, in many cases, culturally, wearing your faith on your sleeve, so to speak, is not always received well, and so navigating that it's challenging, and I think it's something I get better at year by year. Yeah. But this is new. This is a new experience for me tonight.
Well, welcome to it. So you may wonder, and I gather you did a little homework and looked at some of my videos. So sometimes I'm a little bit like Jerry Springer, so be careful. Other times I'm like Oprah, but maybe I'm balanced as somewhere in Charlie Rowe's zone. So we're just going to have a conversation. Invite you all to listen in on it, and maybe there'll be a nugget or an idea or two that you could take back into your lives, your ministry, as Neely said, the priesthood of all believers, whatever your faith commitments may be, that there might be an idea or two of interest. Let's just roll back a little bit. So you and I each went to college in Pennsylvania. You're from Happy Valley. Tell us a little bit about your growing up, and just to kind of locate you, because we know you have this extraordinary resume, but what makes you tick? Tell me a little about your growing up.
Well, I grew up in a very small town of 6,000 people in Pennsylvania, a town called Bellefonte. It peaked in the 19th century, probably as its own industrial center. In the 20th century,
was it a coal town, or?
It was limestone, and then early in the iron ore era.
Okay.
And then actually my grandfather was founded a brass manufacturing business that was one of the larger employers in that part of Pennsylvania in the early part of the 20th century. And, but as the 20th century moved on, it really ended up, seeing most of the economic drive come from the fact it was 15 miles from Penn State.
Yeah.
And Penn State was of course attracting a lot of jobs to that part of Pennsylvania. I grew up. My parents were from Bellefonte. They had grown up there, and I have an older brother and a younger brother, and our life was. They're in that small town, but my father's business was a real estate development business that was in that community and around Pennsylvania and in a few other parts of the country.
Got it. So just to understand, your parents were, was it a family that always went to worship every weekend? Was that part of your drill, or not really?
It was there was certainly faith in our home, but it was a modest and relatively quiet faith, I guess you'd say. My parents were Presbyterian, and we would attend church not every Sunday, probably 2 Sundays a month for my brothers and for me.
That's actually pretty darn good. Do you have to think, Neely, twice a month? I give that a thumbs up.
And but not no Sunday school, no real deep grounding in theology, and so. I wouldn't even say that I really knew my way through. If you pushed me on, is this in the Old Testament or the New Testament? You could stump me relatively quickly. Right. So it was. It was part of our life, but not a deep part of our life.
Well, I think you're not alone. I'm sure there's many people in this room that would share that sort of an experience where, for whatever sets of reasons, the way the lot fell, that's what you grew up with. And so as you got a bit older, did you become curious about faith, or was it frankly kind of backgrounded? You went off and you were presidential fellow. You worked under President George H.W. Bush for a year and a half, an extraordinary experience. Did you meet people that had this kind of conversation, or not? Just not really.
I think in that period of my life, not so much.
Right.
And I think in that period of my life, that kind of resume speach that Neely talked about was what was dominating my life. And I went to Penn State, I went to the Kennedy School, I worked in the White House. I got a job at Merrill Lynch, which was very exciting and was all-encompassing.
Yeah.
And so at that part of my life, faith wasn't really impacting me, particularly day to day, and I was extremely single-minded with what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, and there may be one or two like this in the room, and this was, frankly, some of my story. Although my wife and I went to church, and I was part of our life, for most of my corporate life, when I was in the office on Monday, I'd like to think I didn't turn into a evil, conniving son of a gun, but I wasn't thinking about this stuff. I had a job to do, and I was trying to do it well, and anchored, hopefully, in things my mom and dad taught me and things I might have picked up along the way in church. But I never was intentional about connecting those dots, which is...
Well, and I think there were, of course, now, in retrospect, and to Neely's comments, you see things in new perspective, and you see you see the hand of God in many ways in parts of your life. When I arrived at Merrill Lynch, I was working in a company that was founded on a very clear set of principles that we operated against. It didn't dawn on me at the moment that our CEO, who was had been a friend of my family growing up, was a German Catholic, and our Chief Operating Officer was Irish Catholic, and one of the more famous leaders of Merrill Lynch was Don Regan, who was an Irish Catholic, and that there was a...
All you need is an Italian Catholic to get the trifecta.
That would have been... that was... just having Irish Catholics and German Catholics was diverse at Merrill Lynch.
A buddy of mine's a very successful entrepreneur in North Dakota, in Fargo. It's a very entrepreneurial part of the country, maybe you know. And out there, a mixed marriage is when a Norwegian Lutheran marries a German Lutheran. So it's the same thing. But I'm sorry, keep going. So there was this footprint of people who had this part of their character, I guess.
Well, and it was, we talked about things in terms of the culture of the company in business terms. We spoke about the principles that we followed as a company, and there was a feeling in terms of camaraderie and even just kind of deep concern for fellow employees that we referred to very naturally as an idea of Mother Merrill, the idea that Merrill Lynch wrapped its arms around its employees. And to me, at that point in my career and life, I sort of took it for granted. This must be how all companies operate, and clear principles and that kind of culture. And I didn't at that time make the connection between the faith and the ethics that flowed from that faith among our leaders and the way that was shaping the company that I was part of.
Can you think of any stories or examples of something you noticed as a young man starting your way where, wow, this is interesting, it's a little different, these principles you're referring to?
Yeah, well, I think it was, there was a willingness that was, the water cooler conversation, it reflected a willingness that the company had to walk away from business opportunities that would be very lucrative for the company, but would violate the principles that were on the wall. And our leaders in those days kind of used a terminology that was, no one's personal bottom line is more important than the reputation of the firm.
No one's personal bottom line is more important than the reputation of the firm.
And so, and this was this idea that every dollar is not a good dollar, and that there are clients that you don't want to serve, and that there are business opportunities that you really can't or shouldn't pursue if you're going to be faithful to your principles. And so watching that in action for some was very, very disorienting. One of the great Merrill Lynch CEOs is Dan Tully. So he was from Stamford, Connecticut, Darien, and the leader of the Irish Catholic, part of our leadership team. Dan was known if a CEO of a client company was speaking poorly of one of our fellow employees at Merrill Lynch and not treating them with respect. He wouldn't only not want to do business with them. You would worry that Dan was going to physically remove that individual from the conference room. So that's how kind of fierce this this protective and very principled culture was.
Yeah. So in your own career, without naming names, obviously for all the obvious reasons, describe a deal you walked away from. Let's say general counsel's office, compliance all said, you're clear, it's fine, it's legal, but it just didn't sit right in your gut, or maybe someone working for you came to you and said, "Hey, boss, is it okay?" Can you think of a story where you've walked away from something?
Well, I mean, I had an opportunity to be in the room around our CEO and our board early in my career because I was the assistant to one of the Merrill Lynch CEOs about 5 years into my career. So, I was at the table not only when we walked away from deals, but when we were addressing and trying to solve problems that flowed from some deals we maybe should have walked away from. And so I think a great illustration was Orange County, California declared bankruptcy. Many in the room may remember that in 1994. And the county was a client of Merrill Lynch. We were sued for several $1 billion, which in those days was a lot of money. There were a series of decisions that the leadership team needed to make about how to both state our case as well as decide what's the right way to address the concerns of the county, restore the reputation of the company, and be straight in terms of telling the story, what we did well and what we did poorly. And that was really extraordinary because it demonstrated this leadership team's willingness to put on the table our shortcomings, also point out where we did the right thing, which was unfashionable in terms of the way the press was covering us, and ultimately to step up and make again what was a large financial settlement to make things right with our client ultimately. And at every step along the way, that journey was driven by a series of ethical decisions that had a great impact on me. And interestingly, by the way, the general counsel was an Orthodox Jew of enormous faith, and he and an Irish Catholic leadership team and a lot of other folks, they may have had enormous differences in the sort of roots of their faith, but they were absolutely locked in terms of their understanding of what the right thing to do was.
And I was about to say, although you just made a liar out of me before I said it, that isn't the temptation in the corporate world, and frankly sometimes in our personal lives, to lawyer up, right? The lawyer says, look, my job is to protect you, and you can't say this, this, and this. Heaven forbid you apologize or acknowledge that, we didn't do some things as well as we should have. Yeah. And that takes a lot of guts to do that in this litigious age we live in.
Yeah. Well, you need it may have been appropriate that our lawyer was an Orthodox Jew because there's a good amount of Old Testament fear that if it's emanating from your general counsel's office, you address a lot of problems before they emerge. But you're absolutely right. Our counsel, Steve Hammerman, who ultimately was vice chairman of the firm, he was never trying to step away from regulation. He was always very quick to point out that to the whole of Wall Street that we needed internally to be our strongest regulators. We needed to find problems before the regulators did and take them to the regulators. And we now see in the years after the financial crisis that was a pretty timeless piece of wisdom that was lost ultimately.
I mean, the banks, let's say the banks, so we take sort of the big 6 or 7, however we want to count them, it's been a tough decade, hasn't it? And your bank, as well as most of the others, have had some rough sledding. And we were talking on the phone the other day, sort of like lost their way, for lack of a better phrase. And not to single out BOA Merrill, but it's been a phenomenon that we've all experienced. We could probably guess how people lost their way pretty easily, or how organizations and leadership did. But a question I'm increasingly interested in is, so if I screw up in my personal life or my professional life, or as a leader of an organization, how do I rebuild that trust? How is your leadership, you yourself personally, or leaders you admire, like your CEO, like Brian, how are they trying to restore something after there's been such a breach of trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think the road to redemption you described, I mean, it in large part has to begin with some real inward-facing analysis around what went wrong. And we talked a lot about, a culture that I described in very positive terms, and without reliving a period of history in great detail, there was those guiding principles that I described, and that culture of Mother Merrill was recharacterized by a leadership team that rather than kind of following and driving and evolving those very positive principles, literally took the principles off the wall, felt they were kind of quaint and out of place, and that the idea of Mother Merrill, this idea of concern for your fellow employees, actually equated to lack of professionalism. And so it was parodied. And, I think I don't want to overstate it and draw an absolute direct connection between that and what went wrong in terms of extending the balance sheet of the company, in the wrong areas of the market, and taking on leverage that was unsustainable. But I don't think they're coincidental. I think losing those guideposts and was a big part of how the operation of the business very quickly got away from serving clients and became a chase for profits in some cases without sight of what we're doing for a client. So the direct answer to your question, David, is kind of the redemption or the kind of return to that way of operating that I saw earlier in my career. Our CEO, Brian Moynihan, who, as you know, and others I'm sure have read, is a Roman Catholic and a man of great faith. Almost the first thing he did as CEO was re-articulate the values of the organization and make sure everyone who worked at the company was clear that we have one purpose as an organization, which is to improve people's financial lives. And
so you got one purpose to improve people's financial lives.
What a simple statement,
yeah.
But that was a statement that during that course of several years leading into the financial crisis and sort of through it was lost strategically and operationally.
Well, and some would argue not only were they not improved, they were harmed.
Yeah.
And again, not just by your bank, but by many. Yeah. So but it's interesting, it's one sentence. I work with different organizations, and maybe some of yours there, who have beautiful core value statements and beautiful mission statements, if you could remember 550 words. And to kind of distill it down to, I think you said, 6 or 7 words to improve people's financial lives. When you see people that either you're grooming and bringing along or others you've just admired over the years, tell me a story or two of someone who's just done something, maybe even heroic, that's against the grain when others would say, hey, come on, just relax, it's fine to do. Can you think of a story or a mentor, someone that left an impression on you?
Well, again, sometimes the heroism is... it's in the mundane in many cases. I mean, it's always, you want to find the person that, stormed into the room and revealed what Bernie Madoff was doing and make that the proof positive that there's good in Wall Street. But I think in our business, we love to call our group of Merrill Lynch financial advisors that were referred to earlier.
15,000 of them.
15,000. We lovingly refer to them as the Thundering Herd.
Right.
And, across the Thundering Herd, every day there are folks doing the right things for clients. And, an interesting thing today is that the whole of our industry is wrestling with some new regulations, and among them is a regulation which is focused on, interestingly, kind of the fiduciary standard, the standard of care that we operate on, with our clients, and that standard is as simple as saying we as a company need to ensure that we put the best interests of our clients first. While many around our industry, and whether companies, lobbyists, or others, have been trying to kind of push back some of this regulation because it's inconvenient to change the way we operate. One of the things that, to me, at scale, across the Thundering Herd, has been very gratifying to see is that there's been a groundswell of support among our advisors to say, hey, isn't this what we're all about? You know, putting our clients' interests first. I mean, these are the principles that Charlie Merrill articulated at the very beginning of our company, and you know, they overwhelmingly are recognizing that hey, there's a time for evolution and change in our business overall. And you know, while the Wall Street Journal may be skeptical, and there's plenty of reasons for critics to attack what's happening on the regulatory front, it's the right thing to do. And so, for me, 4 months into my job, I just did 16 or 17 town hall meetings in rooms like this with 300 or so members of the Thundering Herd in each of those sessions. And you know, in every meeting at the end, people come up to me and shake my hand and say, hey, let's make sure we never give up the high ground with regard to supporting the fiduciary standard and ensuring that all of our clients in the market know that we want to lead the way to a better place for Wall Street.
Yeah. You know, what you've just done, a couple of those stories you've been telling is really, you've, Neely and Chuck and some of the other clergy in the room, you've just been a theologian. You've talked about redemption. So when we sin, when we screw up, when we do that which we know we ought not to do, as St. Paul would say, how do we recover? How do we regroup? And how do organizations and institutions do that? Redemption is a powerful concept. And now you're talking about stewardship. And bankers and lawyers, we call it fiduciary trust or trusteeship. But stewardship is a profound biblical concept. In fact, one of the things I learned when I was slogging away through my seminary years is the English root of the word stewardship is the steward of the sty, the pig sty, because pigs were a valuable asset back in Middle Ages. And when the owner or the lord would go away, you put your most trusted person in charge of the livestock. So you are now a steward of... No,
but we lean in the direction of bulls, not pigs, for Merrill Lynch. So
you know, I wasn't thinking. I've got braces which have bulls and bears. I don't know what I was thinking. I did just ticker tape instead. But you know, let me loop back to faith a bit, if you don't mind, as we sort of interweave between these conversations. So you were raised in the Presbyterian tradition, but you've made a change of recent. Would you mind sharing that if it's not too personal?
Sure. No, it's not too personal at all. I joined the Catholic faith a year ago. I was confirmed at St. Michael's here in Greenwich, which culminated about a 2-year process, the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, RCIA process. And you know what brought me to that point was we talked earlier in my career how faith really wasn't in my field of vision, right. I guess.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You know, as my journey of life moved forward, Heliani and I were married. We had a family with 3 wonderful kids who were ages 13, 10, and 6. Our 2 girls are here at Sacred Heart in Greenwich in school. Jack is at Brunswick, but was growing up in the Catholic faith. Heliani's Catholic, and to me, I think that that knock on the door that God is where God is calling on all of us was something that through watching our children and the love in our family all of a sudden became something that I heard and responded to. And Heliani probably thought there was something strange that happened to me, but that's her prerogative.
So she slipped me 3 or 4 questions. No, I was kidding.
But I said,
that's a big deal.
I wanted
as an adult, right?
I wanted to, take the time to really explore my faith, and it became just a powerful conversion experience for me. And this, the time spent in RCIA and the, understanding the Catholic faith in some degree of depth, and realizing that so much of what I understood about faith was incomplete and or naive. Principles I used to think were in conflict with each other, faith and reason, perhaps at the top of the list, are enormously compatible, and
so that was one of the things that came out, that faith and reason are not in
very
conflict,
much.
they're actually aligned.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
And so, I'm 2 years into, I think, feeling that a new aspect of understanding, a new part of the world, a new part of myself has kind of opened, and I'm, able to see all sorts of things in a light that I never realized I could, and that's, it begins with the relationships in our family, but it certainly extends to the way I think about and see what's happening in the workplace. And it's now given me that opportunity to sort of look back at what we talked about from 25 years ago,
Right.
and and understand that the faith of a leadership team, the principles on the wall, the cultural ties among an organization were not random occurrences.
Yeah.
Those were a manifestation of a deep faith and an ethical perspective that flowed from that faith. Yeah. And what I am trying to do today in any way I can is again, without wearing it on my sleeve or having it be something that's kind of distracting or off-putting in the workplace. Try to operate with clarity of with a moral compass and kind of clarity of purpose, and in a way where we are, as leaders and with our clients, manifesting a concern for others as the kind of core driver of what we do as a business. And I wouldn't normally put it that way if we weren't together and having this dialogue, but I can see every day around me those who kind of operate in a way that's kind of consistent with that centering of their life around faith, or that concern for others, or that awareness of right and wrong. I think it has. I didn't plan it this way, but the interesting part of extending Neely's discussion of resume IQ or resume and eulogy
right.
is that in my own life, I think it was focusing on resume, trying to get in touch with eulogy, and then surprisingly realizing that by being in touch with eulogy, you're probably better positioned to drive resume. And so it's, it's a, these are, not your ethics and faith aren't just sort of helping you survive in kind of a complicated decision-making environment. I think it's it's giving you the tools to be, a far stronger leader over time.
Yeah. Now, one of my professors said to me once that, God didn't put in place the 10 Commandments to punish us. I mean, they're there to help us, and sometimes to protect us from ourselves. So there's a wisdom. Some people even talk about wisdom literature. I appreciate tying together a couple of things you said. How you talked about that sort of heroic morality, or making a heroic moral or ethical stance. It's often in the minor things. It's not the big things. And many would say, and if you go back to the Book of Samuel or some other text, it's the small tests that God gives us along our journey. And if we pass, in fact, Carla Harris came and spoke once to the group, and she said, God gives us tests along the way, and if we fail the small ones, we're bound to have to take those tests over. So there is this dimension of faith sort of can anchor us in the smaller things, and then when we do have those infrequent but potentially life-changing ones, perhaps we're a bit more prepared for them. Tell me a bit about, if you don't, and this isn't an advertisement for your organization or any organization, just how...
Well, there's nothing so bad about that.
But you are doing something different, and it's public domain knowledge. I don't know a lot of other wealth managers who have a guy like Jim Ryan, who just hosted, as one of their wealth managers, and he and his team hosted a day-long seminar, which unfortunately I was unable to attend, but one of my postdocs went, on, here's the phrase, faith-consistent investing. Faith-consistent investing. What the heck was that about?
Well, it's, this is one of the most fascinating, and I think ultimately will prove to be one of the most powerful trends in the investing world, it's kind of coming, it's been brought upon us by a demand from many of our clients to no longer view their investment activities separate and apart from the way they think about their communities, the broader world that we inhabit, the values that they hold dear. And faith-consistent investing is really one manifestation of an idea we call impact investing, which is an idea of viewing an investment portfolio not simply through the lens of risk versus return, which is kind of the classic way to think about a portfolio, but to add a third dimension of that to that, and to understand that you can have portfolios that are optimal in risk return, in terms of risk and return, but they can be very different in terms of their impact on the broader world.
Right.
They can, be investing in ways that are, have no attentiveness to carbon, to the carbon footprint of the companies invested in, or have great attentiveness to that. You can invest in companies that are driving economic development, or you can invest in portfolios that have, perhaps nothing deleterious, but no particular anchor to that idea. And what we're seeing is that as the center of gravity of our client base has moved from the World War II generation to the baby boomers.
In fact, hang on one second. Can you flip that video we've got on, DJ? You spoke recently at an economist forum on impact investing, and can we roll that?
We have four powerful things coming together for the first time. We've got very clear demand from clients, and the level of innovation is at record levels, and we have intellectual capital of all kinds. So with those three things in place, we're now focused on the fourth part of the puzzle, which is how do we make sure that we have processes around our business, which every time we're touching our millions of clients, that our 15,000 financial advisors are incorporating impact investing in the way they understand client needs and the way they build portfolios.
And my father was in the insurance business, and he always used to say life insurance was a product that had to be sold, it was never bought.
That fundamental desire to combine my financial life and my broader set of values, that's at the core of this. And I don't believe this is first and foremost going to be sold, because the World War II generation really didn't think this way. The boomers absolutely think this way. And the millennials can't imagine any other way to manage money.
So unpack that a little bit, these different generations where, and by the way, I loved how you politely told the other guy, you're wrong, when he said you had to sell it as opposed to it selling itself. Yeah. But these are tectonic changes in society, aren't
absolutely.
they? It's not just...
I mean, for many people thinking about the investment world, at times it's less than clear. So let me put it in more consumer terms. This is as simple as the reason that many American consumers drive a Tesla instead of another brand of vehicle, or shop at Whole Foods and not another supermarket, or wear Tom's shoes instead of another brand. It comes from the fact that these are not only great products, but they're also addressing some deeper values that I hold dear. What impact investing is taking that same motivation,
of which faith can be one of those.
And faith can clearly be one of those, and bringing it to the investing world. And so it's very exciting because I think for those who watch Wall Street and who have an interest in how this industry is evolving, that we evolve by following the demographics and the desires that are expressed by our clients. Wow. And our clients are now asking us, beginning with our most sophisticated, highest net worth clients, help me incorporate my values. In the case of that Jim Ryan conference, my perspectives on faith into the portfolios that I'm building. And so we're doing the R&D work and doing the product development to be able to solve for this very new, very interesting demand from clients. And as I alluded to, our most sophisticated clients are asking the question first. Family offices who may, manage hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're going to put us in position where if we can't answer their demand to connect their faith in their investment portfolios, they're going to walk down the street and go to another investment firm to do that. But they're bringing their millennial children to the table to have that conversation with us, and their millennial children, so to speak, who are thinking about a career on Wall Street, are only showing up for interviews at firms that get it with regard to impact investing. And so there's kind of a wave that's crashing into our industry, and I'm very optimistic about what this is going to mean, because it's mainstreaming the incorporation of faith and broader perspectives on the world into investment management, and I think it's going to improve our business in multiple ways. It's going to help us have more of a long-term perspective. It's going to help us build kind of sustainability criteria into portfolios, and it's going to cause us to understand and know our clients more deeply, because it's pretty easy for me to say, hey, tell me your net worth, your age, your tax status, and when you need the money, and I'll give you a portfolio. If I want to talk with you about impact investing, I have to really understand your faith, and I have to understand what other values, environmental values, your perspective on social issues, how much you care about the governance of the companies that you may own in your portfolio. I have to understand at a very deep level, which is, I think it's great for clients, and it's wonderful for our business, and for both of those reasons, that's why I think there's going to be great energy behind this trend.
But it must be a fascinating, I agree, but I think it must be a fascinating leadership challenge of your 15,000 advisors. They're not all like this man we keep referring to, Jim, who's conversant in this. His brother's a Trappist monk, so how he got into it, if I recall, is his brother's order got too wealthy, because the Trappist monks are very industrious and frugal. But other people who don't have that language, who maybe aren't faith-oriented themselves, is it uncomfortable for some? Or
I think it's beyond uncomfortable.
And fairly so.
Initially, it is such a different wavelength that at first many don't know exactly what we're even talking about. As Jim Ryan would talk, if Jim Ryan 5 years ago spoke to a randomly selected group of financial advisors, very few would respond. We've been introducing these principles, fostering product development so that there's, if we catch your attention that, hey, this might actually be something my client is looking for, and a way to understand my client more deeply, we want to make sure we have the products and services to actually fulfill that desire. And the press is spending a lot of time focused on, this topic of impact investing. Europe is ahead of the U.S., and we're beginning to see, the maturity of some of these trends in Europe come to the U.S. market. And, what was this different wavelength 3 years ago? The way I would feel that is when we had a big training meeting with 500 financial advisors, and we had a breakout session focused on impact investing. There would be 2 or 3 lonely people in the room that reminded you of the Maytag repairman 3 years ago. Today, in a very short period of time, it's the most popular breakout session there is, because we sort of encourage advisors, have this conversation with your boomer clients, and you'll be amazed at what you hear. And they have the conversation. They've been amazed and somewhat disoriented by what they've heard, and they want to learn a lot more about it.
For what it's worth, if you look at the pipeline of people you're hiring, I look at my students, and we were talking about this at table tonight, Andrew, and some of you know, I teach a course at Princeton for undergraduates at the university called Business Ethics and Modern Religious Thought. The students call it How to Succeed Without Selling Your Soul. That's their tagline for it. And I bring in different business leaders representing different traditions from the three different Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, and Islam to talk about this. And the class I know is 19% atheist or agnostic, because I use a web-enabled sort of clicker voting software on their cell phone. So I know exactly what they are. It's all anonymous. But they are really interested in this. Yeah. So, and they want to, the mere fact they sign up for this elective, there's 150 kids in the students in the class. And it's not because I'm a great teacher. It's because they want to ask these questions, even if they don't necessarily align with a particular religious or faith tradition. Yeah. So I think there's there is a change in the air, and there's different ways of
Well, I
thinking
mean,
about this.
coincidentally, today, at our company, we have at the board's direction, we established a committee of our senior leadership specifically which focuses on environmental, social, and governance topics in the company. And, just to give you an idea how central this discussion is, today that group gathered, and we had Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, spending an hour having the conversation that you and I are having right now with this committee, Brian Moynihan, our CEO, and Larry, which I think, for those who are dubious about, hey, is this just is it a passing fad? Is this is this something that is a good marketing ploy? There are, CEOs of the largest asset managers, the largest banks and wealth managers are, getting together and spending serious time and energy with their leadership teams, saying, how do we ensure that the industry follows this trend? Because it goes down a road where there's many things that are being addressed. The opportunity to do better for clients, to inject new energy and excitement in the culture of our organizations with the young people you described joining us, and to get away, or at least begin to step away from the short-termism, which is all too prevalent in much of Wall Street, much of the business community.
But if we roll back to shortly after 2008, the Occupy Wall Street movement, of course, was rampant, and a lot of justifiably angry people. And whether one agrees with all the arguments that were made or not, it was a pretty tough time for the banking sector. A lot of people were not really proud to wear their logo items when they were walking around town. Do you think that, and what should I tell my students if they think they may want to go to Wall Street or financial services of some sort? Is banking a noble profession?
Oh, I certainly think it is. I think if it wasn't fulfilling a purpose in our society and generating real value,
what is that
it would
purpose?
disappear. Well, I mean, it's ensuring that capital reaches opportunity, reaches innovation and reaches entrepreneurship, and it's the engine that enables economic development. And without the banking system operating in that fundamental way, great ideas and sources of capital would rarely meet. They meet today in ways that are so frictionless, we take it for granted. That lack of friction in the system, certainly creates opportunities to jump the rails and for things to happen like the financial crisis. But, when we think about the ability of people around the world to utilize credit, to purchase homes, to work hard from their lives and have a good sense that they're going to achieve dreams and be able to, enjoy later life with dignity. All of these are outcomes of a sound, ethical financial system. And so I would encourage those young people to, believe that there is a powerful role for banks and free markets in the financial system. And, that young person who's doubting it or questioning or probing is exactly who we want to be part of building, our firms going forward.
Let me ask you one last question. In this business ethics course I teach, I build it around 5 different questions. I call it the 5 Qs. And if they pass the 5 Qs, they pass the course. And the 5th and final Q is the one I'm going to give you to see if you pass the course. Are you ready? But actually, I want to learn from you, and hopefully all of us. One of the things that Aristotle taught us, and Thomas Aquinas picked up on it, and in many religious traditions, both Protestants and Catholics in particular, I'm most familiar with, in Judaism, have this concept Aristotle called a habituation. You could develop habits. So you find an ideal person who embodies certain virtues, and by practicing. So I'm a tennis player, and your wife was a professional tennis player at one point. And by practicing the shot, we finally get it. And even greatest, so Roger Federer, you remember everyone was beating him, and Nadal could beat him because he couldn't handle a high kick backhand serve, but he worked on it, and even Federer had to practice to overcome that weakness and learn a new shot. Here's the question I ask the students: how do you stay ethically fresh? So here you are in a prominent position, a lot of stresses and pressures, including quarterly earnings, which you're not immune from either. And it's so easy, either consciously or subconsciously, the slippery slope to cut a little bit here, cut a little bit there, and all of a sudden you wake up one morning going, what was I thinking? And the FBI knocks on your door and you do the perp walk. Or there's an investigation. Aren't you glad you came? So, but what habits, what habits and disciplines have you developed to keep you ethically fresh, that you're not dulled to the heat being turned up and maybe fudging here or there?
I guess I'd answer it in maybe three ways.
Yeah.
I mean, in very practical terms, how you communicate and work with the colleagues who are in your immediate circle is where it begins, because there is a strong tendency at every point in your career as you progress to feel that you know more than you really do. My father at the dining room table, the strongest lessons that he delivered in pointed terms to my brothers and me was, the most dangerous people are the ones who don't know what they don't know. And so, I think that's fundamentally open lines of communication with the people around you who have different perspectives, in many cases perspectives that are not pleasant to hear because they see the world slightly differently than you do. Those uncomfortable that uncomfortable dialogue, that kind of grinding of the gears is the most powerful thing. That's sort of number one. Number two, I think you need to be, the more you move forward in your career and the more your organization begins to have some levels, you need to work extra hard to reach out of the normal circles that you're in and ensure that you are really in touch with what's happening. Because, we had a topic recently that I wouldn't want to talk about in specific terms, but that initial circle of people that I talked about had grown very comfortable with a business practice. And it wasn't until I was out in some of those town hall meetings with, a few thousand folks who were working with clients on the ground that I heard them kind of tapping me on the shoulder and saying, you may want to take a look at this. This could be a problem. And it was sort of amazing that even kind of a varied leadership team that I was working with hadn't picked up on a risk that someone who's working every day with a client, it was self-evident. And then third, I think that, stepping away, if you're 24/7, doing your job in a way that is I'm sure in many ways is sort of stereotypically the road to ever greater success. If you're not putting boundaries on that, stepping away and, really living a life with your family, taking time to read outside of, the publications that are driving work. In my case, and in the last few years, spending time reading and understanding my faith, all of those activities are what gives you that critical distance from what's happening in the workplace to, I hope on a good day, create that impulse inside you that says, that just doesn't feel right, or we're really we're doing some things that maybe the whole organization's comfortable with, but it seems in conflict with that other part of my life. If you don't have that other part of your life, you miss it entirely. And so those are just three ways I think about it. I hope I passed the fifth Q.
What do you think? Let's all give Ann a huge round of applause.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much.